the primary person for this community this year and even last year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we are recording the meeting.
Perfect.
Can you see my screen?
It's loading, I think.
Okay.
Still loading. In my side, at least.
No, same here. Still loading.
Okay,
There we go.
I can see your
Perfect.
screen.
Thank you so much. One more time, welcome to Cloud Data Driven Online User Group Meeting. And I know some of you probably just joined us today. It's not too late to say Happy New Year. Great. By the way, my name is Jean-Joseph. I am a data engineer and work for Microsoft as a technical trainer. I'll be one of your hosts for today. And for your information, this session will be recorded. If you feel like you don't want to be part of it, feel free to do the needful. And it will be available later tonight on our YouTube channel. And as you already know, our topic is 3 types of low-code Power BI and Microsoft Fabric extension with Power BI apps. And I can't wait to learn those tricks from John. I will introduce John soon. And I forgot to ask if he goes by John. Hopefully he did.
John is fine.
Thank you. We highly suggest you to follow us on social media and share this meetup group with your friend and peer. And we are 3. Warren is the primary person for this community. If you do have a question, you need to speak. I highly suggest you to reach out directly to Warren. And Kevin is a backup. And I myself as well is a backup of Warren, but Warren is the main person. If you need any information, I highly suggest you to reach out to Warren. Yeah, and as you already know, this user group is part of Microsoft community, so therefore, we highly suggest you to engage with us, but think of diversity because this is a global community. Respect have to take in consideration. You are free to comment, but do it with respect. And I have your video turned off. You do have access to mute yourself, but sometimes that create issue. If this is the case, we will remove that access and get it to you at the end. And if you do have any question, I myself suggest you to type it or raise your virtual hand. However, the speaker, I met John will tell you how he would like to handle the question. And we have a tons of event schedule. Unfortunately, I did not have a time to update this. Call for speaker for SQL is closed. However, I'm going to show you how you can have 5% discount if you want to register for this. In the meantime, while I'm here, these are our community URL. If you want to visit us, feel free to do that. And remember, Microsoft Learn is also at your disposal to keep yourself up to date. Regarding SQL, Wonen, would you like to say something?
No, we are good to go.
Yes.
Just remember this specific code is given for our community, so but you are welcome to use it even if you are not registered to the community, just a general code for the event to get the 5% off the ticket.
Perfect, great. And we also have feature Data Driven 2024 call for speaker open call, correct, Warden?
We did open it, but let's say that it's not officially yet. We're still working on this.
Okay.
There is a bit of time. The event itself is on September, but you are able to start submitting your sessions if you if you have something that fit the community, we do request new materials. Don't submit a session that you already say, or you are going to present before the event, because you want to bring the community a value of new materials. So if you have a good session, you are more than welcome to submit it. We will publish more information in the next few days, weeks. So just follow us.
Yes, thank you. And also, we have a tons of session lined up for you. I highly suggest you to visit our meetup or go to datadrivencommunity.com. If you go to Data-Driven Community, you should be able to have access to register to our community, to submit a session, to register to join. Either way, you either go on Meetup or you go on our website. For today's presentation, we have John, and John will talk on 3 types of low-code Power BI and Microsoft Fabric extension with Power Apps. John, he is a speaker and he also a senior consultant at Inspire. And John, if you don't mind, feel free to share your screen, introduce yourself, and start with the presentation. And one more time, welcome everyone wherever you are. We would like to welcome you. And John, it's really an honor to have you today. Feel free to share your screen and start with the presentation.
Thank you so much. I'll get the screen sharing loading, and hopefully that will show in just a second. First of all, thank you so much. I'm super happy to be invited to speak today. My name is John. I'm based in Copenhagen, Denmark, so time here is a little past 6 o'clock, but that also means that there might be a little bit of, I don't know, latency for any of those of you listening in from other parts of the world, I guess, which most of you probably are. Nonetheless, huge honor to be speaking with you guys. And just to confirm, you guys can see my screen, right?
Yes, we can see your screen great.
Perfect. Super briefly about myself, you said it perfectly, Jean Joseph. I'm a senior consultant with Inspire, which is a Danish-based data consultancy, and I personally work in the intersection between data engineering, business analytics, and user enablement, working with Microsoft Power Platform, Microsoft Fabric, and I love speaking about exactly the intersection between the two, how you can take Power Apps and integrate them with Power BI and Microsoft Fabric, how you can do the same with Power Automate. I also do speaker sessions on that. But today, the topic is exactly as you said. How can we build extensions for Power BI and Fabric with Power Apps? And just to give you a brief overview of today's agenda for the next hour or so, we're going to start out by giving you a small demonstration of what can Power Apps do when you combine it with Power BI and Fabric. Maybe even introduce what is Power Apps, even for those of you who are not familiar with the software. The 3 extensions in question today is going to be a comment extension that will allow you to build custom comment functionality to Power BI reports in Fabric. I have a write back extension that will allow you to write back to Fabric data warehouses, but it could also be any other data source. And then I've also got a ChatGPT extension, which is a proxy for really any API extension that you can think of that you can also embed inside of Power BI with Power Apps. Regarding questions and such, I'll fully embrace the suggestion for you guys to write in the chat. I'll try to do a break, if I remember it, in between each of these extensions to sort of follow up on any questions you might have, and hopefully we'll get most of them answered. So that's the idea for the next 50-60 minutes or so, to cover these different types of extensions inside of Power BI and Fabric with Power
John?
Apps. Yep.
Sorry to interfere you, but in the middle of the screen, you have the banner of Teams saying that you are sharing your screen.
Oh, all right. We'll hide that.
Just
Thank you for mentioning
exactly.
that. Yeah. Cool. Did that work? Did that help?
Yeah, that's great now.
Perfect. Perfect. So to jump straight into it, let me give you guys a small demo of what the solution is all about. So I have here loaded up a small Power BI report in Fabric. Well, I guess we call it now, right? Which is it's built on a standard demo data set, a Contoso data set that I've loaded into a Fabric data warehouse for those who are interested in that. I've made a semantic model on top of that. And this basic report, well, if you take the left-hand side, super basic, 3 KPIs for total sales, total returns, total discount. And then I have a bar chart here that is drilled down to country product email level. Uh, and the context for this whole solution that I'm going to be demonstrating today is what if we wanted to do more than just basic reporting inside of Power BI? What if we wanted to enable our users to, one, provide qualitative insights for other users to see when they consume the report? That could be this comment app, for example. It's very commonly seen in financial reporting that you have an analyst that wants to provide context for the numbers that you're seeing in the app. Perhaps some salesperson's sales numbers are very high and you want to provide an explanation why, or even a link to documentation in your internal systems or externally, or just provide a simple explanation that your managers can see. Those of you who've worked with Power BI's common functionality in the past will know that it's quite lackluster. It's very limited in terms of what you can do with filtering and with history in the comments and linking them together. But with Power Apps, and I'll show you in detail how, we can create a very, very custom extension that allows us to put different comments on different data points, taking respect to all filters being applied, allowing for the, whoa, this is loading really slow. Let me actually just refresh this report just for a sec. But the Power App will be context aware, meaning that we can click on data points in our Power BI report and have the Power Apps filtered by the filters in Power BI. So while the default might be to display the comment for the first data point if it wanted to load, I could also get it to show the data point for the next item in line when I select that one. So you see here the comment has changed. We can build all kinds of extra functionality into this with regards to having a full comment log or history if we wanted to do that. But I've just, in this example, made the most simple version. How can we make a filter and context aware annotation or commentation app extension for Power BI? So that's the first extension that I'm going to show you guys. The second extension that we're going to cover and say, well, okay, how can we expand again the capabilities of Power BI and Fabric for the end user? Well, that could be something like a data write-back app. And data write-back has its merit for many different business use cases. Sometimes you want a simple replacement for an Excel spreadsheet. So, you might have an Excel spreadsheet that's just being passed around by email. Maybe it's a template and people have a tendency to modify it themselves and change data types. And all of a sudden, your old adage, right? Garbage in, garbage out. If you receive a lot of bad data through Excel spreadsheets, it can be really hard to report on top of that. And so you might want to replace an Excel spreadsheet with a Power App. That's a very common use case for a Power App. And one of those exercises that makes sense to do inside of Power BI could be something like either providing input for upcoming budget values. So you could have sort of like a budget engine inside of Power BI where you allow users to input data right inside of the report itself. Or in this case, I have an example where we are maintaining master data inside of Power BI. So the case could be that I'm simply having a Power BI report that is displaying values from a dimension table in my data model, but allowing the end user to actually update values live in my database. Of course, there are all sorts of caveats and ifs and buts, and maybe you don't want to do that. But for the sake of the exercise of explaining how can we perform this kind of live data write back to your database in which the end user is able to input a value and actually override a value in the database, uh, I'm going to show you how we can build this kind of extension, just to show you how it works. In this case, I have a user with the email kara4@adventureworks.com. I've here built an extension app in which I can choose which dimension do I want to remap. I want to change the email to maybe Kara changed her email to kara5@adventureworks.com. Now I missed the hyphen, but it doesn't matter. And if everything works, fingers crossed for live demos and everything, you should see that in a second, this value will automatically update to kara5@adventureworks.com. This was me changing the value in the database live from inside a Power BI report in Microsoft Fabric, which is pretty cool if you implement it in the right scenarios. So that's the second extension that we're going to build today. The third extension is this API extension. In this case, I have built a small application that interacts with the OpenAI ChatGPT API. So just with my personal account in this case, and I could ask it, for example, what is a user group, and I can run my query against the API, and I get a response. And I've designed a small layout here that makes it look like a chatbot interface that most of us by now, I think, have played around with quite a lot, right? This extension is not data aware as it is right now, but if you in your organization have your own version, your own GPT chatbot, you could potentially, if that has a built-in API endpoint, you could be talking with that instead and maybe inquire about your own data. In this case, however, I am just using this as an example for really showing that you could embed a connection to any API inside of your Power BI report. Use cases you could think of in this case could be, well, I mean, anything, right? You could point this extension to a weather forecast API and allow your users from inside of Power BI to look up the weather forecast for tomorrow. I'm not sure if that's a very valid use case, but you could do that, right? You could also use it to get live currency exchange rates. Maybe that's a more business applicable scenario. So that kind of API extension through Power Apps is the third extension that we're gonna talk about today. Right, so that is the demonstration of the final solution, so to say, and we'll build each of these one at a time. Starting out at the very bare bones, I don't expect any of you to have any Power Apps experience, so I will start very basic. And for those of you who knows Power Apps, you'll probably think that the beginning of this session will be a little slow. I will be just giving a couple of tips and tricks just to get everybody started and get everybody on board. But hopefully the second half of the session will be more interesting for those of you with basic Power Apps understanding already. Hopefully all of you will be able to.
We have a small question in the chat.
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead.
When you say it's a plugin, is it safe to assume that this plugin can be used generally with any Power BI report, or is it plugin specifically built for this particular Power BI report?
That's a really good question. So Power Apps and Power BI is both Microsoft products, and the way you get Power Apps into Power BI, and I'll show it in a second, is that you use a natively built-in Power BI visualization called Power Apps for Power BI. So that connection is very stable. It's natively built in, and there's no custom, no third party, no nothing about that. And when you build an app for a Power BI report like this, it will be reusable across multiple Power BI reports. This ChatGPT extension app, for example, I could embed that in 100 different Power BI reports if I wanted. It's completely agnostic. The other two extensions here are slightly more customized to fit the data model of the Power BI report in question here. So if I were to embed this comment app in a different Power BI report, maybe it wouldn't make sense that I had the labels of country, product, and email in there, right? So in that case, the Power Apps that we're building for these extensions may or may not be specific for the report. But no matter what, we're talking a Microsoft product that will work in technical terms, regardless of the report that you're embedding it in. I hope that answered the question. Is there any other questions before we go to the first extension we're building here? No?
Not at this time.
Cool. Let me know if other questions come up. I will also pause after building the first one to sort of recap anything that might have come in. So if you're new to Power Apps, and especially Power Apps embedded inside of Power BI, how do you get started with this? Well, my advice to you would actually be to start from a Power BI report in the browser. Usually, if you work with Power BI, most people will tell you to work with Power BI Desktop. But there's a really good reason to develop your, or at least, well, you can start in Desktop, publish your standard report, and then when you get to the Power Apps building, you want to be doing it in the browser. And that's because your Power Apps will be built in the browser. And if you have both your Power BI report and your Power Apps that you're developing at the same time, open simultaneously, you'll be able to actually jump between the two tabs in your browser and see how clicks you make in Power BI affects the Power App. So it makes really good sense to open up your Power BI report inside of the Power BI service and actually open it in edit mode. And the way you get started is then simply that you will go to the visualizations pane and you'll find the Power Apps for Power BI visualization. It's a native visualization. You don't need to go into the marketplace or anything to get it. It will be pre-installed no matter what you do. And you can simply insert that to your Power BI report. Once you do that, it will give you a quick guide to get started, but I'll tell you just right away that what you need to do is include at least one data field in this visualization, just like you would any other visualization. And really a small trick from me is that before you make this a Power Apps for Power BI visualization, I actually normally do that and I create a table visualization. Then I put in the different dimensions and measures that I want to include. So perhaps I wanted to create a Power App that had product name and total sales from Power BI as part of the app itself. I would start out by creating it as a table, and then I would convert this to a Power Apps for Power BI. You see, I just retain the same data fields, and I can now click create new if I want to create a new Power App, or if I wanted to reference an app I had already built, I could say choose app. That's if you want to start completely from scratch. After you do that, you need to remember to click save this report in the browser, because otherwise, as soon as you hit refresh here, this app will be gone and you'll have to start over again. So remember, when you do this and work in the browser, there's no auto-save capability. You have to remember to save this yourself. I won't start an app completely from scratch here. I'll instead show you that once you have created your app, saved your report, the way that you can edit an existing app is by, again, opening the Power BI report in edit mode and finding the three dots here at the top right corner of the Power Apps for Power BI visualization and click edit. This will automatically open a new tab in your browser. You'll see it appear here. I didn't do anything there besides clicking edit. It opens up my Power App. In Power BI here, I can now say back to report to get back to the report view. And this is just a visual bug that will go away when we refresh. We'll give the Power Apps Designer Studio a little time to load here. It always takes a second. And we're now inside of Power Apps. And the reason that it's so smart to have Power BI and Power Apps open at the same time here in the browser is because this design window, Power Apps design window, is right now linked to Power BI. You can actually see right now that I'm displaying values here to the 2020 United Kingdom, a product name, an email, and a comment that actually reflects what has been selected inside of Power BI. So if I were to select something new inside of Power BI, I select the generic email 3 here, I jump over to Power Apps, you can see that this changed in the other browser window as well. So this makes it really easy to sort of test whatever links you're trying to make between Power BI and Power Apps, see that they are actually working in practice. One quick note on that is that this link does have a tendency to break. So you might have to, every once in a while, save your app, close this, refresh your Power BI report, and open it from the edit window again to sort of reestablish the connection. The way this connection works is that it uses this Power BI integration element, which acts as a data source that you can reference in your Power App. And just to sort of take a step back from there, we're now in Power Apps Designer Studio, right? What is even everything on the screen right now if you're not used to Power Apps? This is the editor for creating new Canvas Power Apps. It's very drag and drop like, very low code and user friendly. There's a bit of coding involved today, but most of it is low code. Power Apps are built up if we go to this tree view, that's sort of the main design view inside of Power Apps, you can see that a Power App is built up of different screens. You can see I've had a few demos here warming up to today's session. I have different screens, and on each screen there are a number of controls, which are all of these graphical elements. I can insert new controls by clicking insert, and from this dropdown select I want a new button or text input. Again, very drag and drop like. And then each control will have a number of properties that I can configure with some low, some pro code to determine what happens when the user interacts with all of these elements. So for example, I can configure the text box to have a default value, and I can configure my button to do something when I select the button. So that's sort of the basic idea of Power Apps. And Power Apps can work standalone, working with just local data sources, but they can also be connected to any number of data sources you can imagine. There are pre-built connectors to Dataverse, SharePoint, SQL servers, and you can, as I will show you later, even create custom connectors to any API out there. In this case, for the comment application, what I'm doing is that I've decided that I want to save and store my comments in a Dataverse table, but that could just as well have been a SharePoint list, or it could have been a SQL table. And so I have connected to this table that I have already created, a table which contains the columns year, country, product, email, and comment. Nothing more than that, just to keep it simple. And what I wanted to do is then to create a screen that allows us to write new comments to Power BI, in addition to seeing what values have been selected inside of Power BI. And this is where things get maybe a little bit confusing when you're working between Power Apps and Power BI, is that as a data source, we only see the destination table here, so the source that we are writing to. We do not see Power BI as a data source coming in here, right? Despite these values, United Kingdom 2020, comment, etc., that's actually coming from Power BI. For some reason, this Power BI integration, which acts as a data source, is displayed in here in the tree view, while it actually acts like a data source. So you'll have to figure out that little tidbit of information to get around sort of working with these two products in combination. But once you pass that hurdle, it's pretty easy to get started with. So let me just show you an example of how we can build a screen like this. Let me actually just duplicate this screen and delete everything on it, just to retain sort of the size of the screen most of all, and the background color. And if we were to design a new screen here to take advantage of the information coming in from Power BI, the first thing I'd want to do is add a couple of text labels. I'd want to display to the user of the Power App what item have I selected in Power BI. So really what I want to design first are these labels here at the top. How do we do that? Well, in Power Apps, it's as easy as going to the Insert menu. You can either find it here or in the left-hand side. And I can drag and drop or simply click on text label to get a new text label into the screen here. You can resize it, change the font size of the input, and you can write whatever text you want in here, right? So I think the first label was a year. We can go ahead, and the menu on the right here, I can change the color of this text to be white, so it's a little more legible on the green background. I could decide to make the font weight semi-bold or bold, and then let's say that's it, right? I can copy paste this just to make it a little quicker to get a couple of labels with the same formatting. And I want to have at least another one here called product. If I remember correctly, I don't remember the order. Let's see. Yeah, year, country, product, email. Year, country, product, and email. All right. Spread those out a little. And then the fun part is, of course, getting the information from Power BI in here. Right now, we've just created static labels, right? We've just put static information in here. And now if I wanted to reference the data coming in from my Power BI data source, instead of having year here on the text property of my text label here, I can instead start referencing my data source. So I can go ahead and start typing Power BI integration, and the IntelliSense of Power Apps will help me and say there's an object called Power BI integration. If I click dot, it'll also say me there's something called Power BI integration.data. And then the trouble with the label arises in that Power BI integration.data is in fact a table of data, and a text label can only understand a record of data. So we need to go ahead and grab the first item from Power BI integration.data. And then we want to say, which column do we want to display? Well, I want to get the year, and that's it. If I double click or highlight Power BI integration.data, I can see the entire table of data that's coming in from Power BI. So I can actually get a visual sort of cue from Power Apps telling me what can I do with this object. And had I not selected anything in Power BI, I would be able to see the entire table of items here and not just one. But this is a nice little sort of, yeah, now I'm referencing the record here. So if I'm getting first of that table, I can see all the different columns and values for that exact record. And that's how we built that. So I can go ahead and copy paste this a few times as well. Say we want the country and we want the product. And it's going to be a little messy here if in the interest of time, just to show you how this can be built. And that would be the top of the screen, more or less built, right? The next part is we want to allow the end user to provide some input. So we'll add a text input. It's as easy as that. We can resize this a little bit. We can make the font size smaller. We can, let's say, multi-line it instead of single line. We can say, add a hint text, enter new comment, and instead delete the default input here. So it has a nice little sort of enter new comment display there. And that's actually it. If I go into to preview this app, I can now type stuff inside of this text input. Very low code, right? The part where it gets less low code is say, well, okay, what if we actually do want to display a default message, right? What if I do indeed want to display the comment that has already been registered for this data point? Well, that's where a little bit of coding does come into play. And in the interest of time, I will copy paste this formula and I will talk you through it on the other page as we implement it. So in the default here, what I'm doing here is that I am essentially doing a lookup formula where I'm saying I want to look up in my table of comments. Then I'm doing a little bit of, well, it looks much like SQL here, really, right? I'm using a CTE, really, a with expression to define a couple of variables to be used inside of my expression. I'm saying, well, really, these are the same formulas you saw me use on the text labels. I want to store the year, the country, the email, and the product name inside of this with statement. And then I want to do a lookup towards my comment table and say, well, if the year is equal to the year coming in from Power BI, the country is equal to the country, et cetera, then display whatever comment is in that comment table. And now you see that it has defaulted to comment for generic email, which is the value already stored in the database for this data point. The last piece of the puzzle here is really just to create a button that allows us to either patch a new or overwrite the existing comment that might be registered on this data point in our comment table. So I'm going to insert a button. Now, this is large and blue. Let's just scale that down a little bit. Resize it, give it a little bit of a different color. It's an ugly green, but we'll take it. And then again, I'm just going to copy the code from the screen right here. There we go. I'll talk you guys through what the code is doing. So again, this code here that I'm right now on the button, and now I'm on the onSelect property of this button because I want to define what happens when the user is selecting the button. This is the most code heavy part of doing Power Apps, is essentially when you want to create new data. It's not as low code. You could be using forms, but they're not as flexible. So I'll leave it with this, that there's a little bit of SQL-esque coding in it like this. I'm again defining a small CTE here with a with statement, storing the year, country, email, product, and then also as a comment, I'm referencing whatever value is in my text input 3 here. And I'm saying, okay, whatever is in text input, this should reference text input 3 instead. It's because I just copy pasted it, text input 3. store that as the variables seen here. And then I want to use a patch formula to send data to my data source. So the way this works is that I'm patching the data source called test table comments. And then I'm using a coalesce function to differentiate whether I want to create a new record or if I wanted to edit an existing. If you wanted to create a simpler version of this app, you could skip this part and simply just always write, append new comments. And then you would just provide logic inside of the display box here to always display the latest comment. But in my case, I went one step further and said, well, okay, what if we wanted to edit existing records as well? Because that's a very common use case and also something we're going to use in the writeback extension in a second. So I'm using this coalesce statement, which for those of you who don't know coalesce, what it does is that it returns the first non-blank argument. So what I do is I first try to look up and see, is there already something in my comments table that matches the selected year, country, email, and product name? And if there is, it's going to use this as a reference and overwrite that value. If there's not, it's going to default to create a new record in that table. So that's what this coalesce does. And once we've identified whether it's a new record or we are overwriting an existing, no matter which of them, we're going to save the following values in the following columns. And I'm simply mapping the 5 variables that I defined up here to the column names of the 5 columns in my destination table. And I've coincidentally here named them the same. It can sometimes be nice and sometimes a little confusing, but you could help yourself and sort of give them slightly varied name, right? Up here, I could have defined it could be my year variable, just to make it easier for me to distinguish, right? And you can see here, Power Apps is going to help you if you write something that's not right. So now here, I can reference year variable, and that would maybe make it a little easier for me to understand. But that's actually it. That's how you build a comment extension for Power BI in just 15 minutes or something like that. Of course, very simple here, right? And you can probably think of lots of small extra functionality you'd want to build into this, but that is the general gist of it. Before we move on to the next extension, just wanted to take a quick breather and see if there are any questions in the chat. If any of you can be helpful to let me know. I can't see the second, the Teams chat window right now. Oh, now this it looks like. All right.
No, there are no questions at this time, but again, people, please use the chat for questions, and more than a question, you can use it for discussions as well. So if you want just to point something, you are more than welcome.
Yeah, please. It's only nice to get some discussion points or inputs. So feel free to ask also while I continue with the next demonstration. So that was the first app and the easiest app, so to say. I know there was a little bit of coding involved, but hopefully you got the message as well that building a Power App is really easy. It's drag and drop. It's clicking graphical elements and adjusting things like it was a PowerPoint slide. It's something that anybody can do really, and then you need to maybe look up on one of the many nice community resources, YouTube videos, blogs, to see how you write the code for the final submit button. That's about it for building a comment app, at least. To go the next mile, though, how do we build a writeback extension? Well, let me go ahead and close this first app down and instead show you how I've built the next app. So again, my suggestion would be to open up the Power App from inside of Power BI or create it from in here to establish that link between Power BI and the Power Apps. Let's go back here. Let's let that load. And now that we've established sort of the general idea of how do we build Power Apps sort of from scratch, I'm not going to go ahead and recreate all the graphical user interface objects that we'll see in the app. We'll talk more about what is required for you in terms of the data structure, what is it that you need to go fetch in Power BI and Fabric to make this connection work, and how does, and maybe some tips and tricks with regards to the code implementation that you do need for this extension. So data write back to, well, in this case, it's to a data warehouse inside of Microsoft Fabric, but it could have been to basically any data source that you could imagine. It could again have been a SharePoint list or a Dataverse table, or it could have been a SQL server. The reason why you might want to use something like the Fabric data warehouse or a SQL server or a Dataverse table in this case, and not use SharePoint, is because the specific use case here that I wanna do is a write back extension in which the data that I submit here shows up inside of my Power BI report live. So before, the comment app that we were playing around with before, that never produced any data that showed up in the Power BI report itself. It was sort of its own small little contained environment. We were writing to a Dataverse table and reading from a Dataverse table only inside of the app. With this app, this write back extension app, we want to write to a Fabric data warehouse and have that value displayed from the warehouse live in our report. And that requires us to have either a direct query or a direct lake connection in our data model between the Power BI data model and the underlying source. So that's why not all data sources will work for this second extension. But SQL Server, Dataverse, Fabric data warehouse, those three at least will all work. In this case, it's a Fabric data warehouse, and that is actually a bit of an edge case in the sense that to get that to work, we will also need a small Power Automate flow to help us. The reason for that is that in Power Apps, we can connect to, of course, a number of data sources. You can see here, I've connected to a couple of SQL Server connections if I wanted to do that. And I could actually also go ahead here and connect to a Fabric data warehouse SQL endpoint by selecting the SQL Server here. And let me see, I can probably just pick this one. Let me go to app.powerbi.com. I'll show you where to grab that. When you work with Fabric data warehouses, you will sometimes need to use the SQL Server endpoint connection string. And the reason you'll want to be using the warehouse instead of the data lakehouse in Fabric is because only the Fabric warehouse has both read and write capabilities. So what you'll do is you'll go inside of your Microsoft Fabric workspace where you have your warehouse. You'll go into your warehouse and you will go into the settings of it. And here you'll find a SQL connection string. And if you copy this and remember the exact name of the warehouse, you can go into your Power App, you can paste in the server name, that's the string you just put, and then you'll need to type in the exact name of the warehouse as the database name. That'll allow you to actually connect and import tables from your Fabric data warehouse and use that as a data source inside of Power Apps. Super nice. What is, however, not nice is that for some reason, there is some limitations on the T-SQL layer in the Microsoft Fabric data warehouse. That means that you cannot enforce primary keys on tables. And that's a very specific limitation, but that means that Power Apps can actually not natively write to that same endpoint, even though it can read from that endpoint. So if I, for example, I have a button here, a submit button, and I'm going to go through the entire code with you in a second. But if I were to uncomment this, I would get a weird error here saying that the data source is either read only or has no primary key, so the function patch can't write to it. And that's the reason why we do need a small Power Automate flow to assist us in this endeavor. But I'll show you that in just a second that I have it in here, and I'll show you how to build that. To get back to the start though, however, building a data write-back application, in this case, the use case is we want the end user to be able to pick a data point in our report, choose a dimension to adjust. We want them to see what is the selected value currently and what is then the updated value that we want to override it with. So in Power Apps, what I've done is that I've created a couple of labels, label controls, just like we saw before. I've created a drop-down control, which you've not seen before, but I've simply just hard-coded 3 different options here. It doesn't matter what you call them at this stage. So I've just set country, product name, and email to make it recognizable for the end user. Then I have a text label here that I have given it a property that's called display mode disabled to sort of indicate to the user that this is a value that they cannot change. And then I've set the default value of this to be first Power BI integration.data dot the column I want. And then I'm using a switch statement to say that, well, if the user has selected email inside of the dropdown, I wanted to return the email address currently selected. If they've selected product, give me the product name, you get the point. Finally, there's a blank text input that's just exactly like how we build it in the comment extension. No default value, only a bit of a hint text saying enter new value. That's sort of the primary setup. And then all the magic happens on this little button here and in the Power Automate flow that I've included inside of the Power App. So again, let me show you just how this submit button works. You sort of get the drill now with these CTEs, I guess. So I'm starting out by saying, well, first of all, I'm using this to just display like a loading spinner on the screen. So you can ignore that for now. To get the basic functionality working here, I'm again using a with expression to store a couple of variables inside of this app. So I'm saying I have a destination table that I want the user to be submitting data into, and that table again depends on what did they select on the dropdown. So if they selected country, well, the destination table in the Fabric data warehouse I want to be patching to is the dbo.dim customer, etc. for product name and for email. Similarly, for column name is a different column name depending on what was selected in the dropdown. Then I have a variable called old value that's simply referencing whatever is displayed in that text label, and I have the new value to override it with. And now the combination between Power Apps and Power Automate is going to help us, because while Power Apps was not able to patch directly to the data warehouse, Power Automate has no trouble doing it at all. And in fact, we can use Power Automate to just send a raw SQL query with an insert or an update statement to that data warehouse. And we can even parameterize it with values coming in from Power Apps. So that's exactly what we're going to do here. So the next thing that's going to happen is that if we're going to read this from inside out, I'm going to say fabric writeback.run. This is going to call my Power Automate flow, which I will show you in a second. And I want to run it and give it those 4 variables that we just defined up here in the CTE at the same time. So run fabric writeback with these 4 parameters. And then whatever is the result of this automated flow, I want to save that in a variable. Then we could use that to sort of display to the end user if the submission was a success or a failure. I haven't done that, but we could do that. So I'm passing 4 variables into a Power Automate flow. What does the Power Automate flow do? Well, let's click Edit here. This opens a Power Automate editor right inside of Power Apps. For those who don't know, Power Automate is just a workflow automation software, a digital process automation tool that allows you to, based on different triggers, automate a series of actions. And in this case, the workflow is triggered by us clicking a button, but you can also create workflows which are event-driven or scheduled to run every day at noon or whatever you might be. In this case, the trigger is when I click a button in Power Apps, and it's going to accept these 4 variables as an input. The second action, you see there's only 3 actions happening in this automate flow. The second action is execute a SQL query. And I've here provided it with the same server and database information as I was doing before in the Power App. And then I'm running a simple parameterized SQL query here against that database. So I'm saying update the table that I want to write to, set the column that I want to write to where the value is, or set the column to this value where the column was the old value. So essentially, as an example, it could be, well, update the customers table and set email equal to John's new email, where email is equal to John's old email. That's all there is to it. And this is fully dynamic and parameterized and able to write to the multiple different dimensions at once, right? If I had selected customer name or product name in the dropdown, the table to write would, because of my switch statements, automatically reflect that now I want to write to the products table instead, and I want to alter the product name from old product name to new product name. And then again, if I wanted to help the user and let them know if their data write back exercise succeeded, I can send a variable back to Power Apps to be used in sort of a notification check or something if I wanted to implement that in my Power App. But that's all there is to it, except I'm actually forgetting the most important thing, which is, well, the idea here is that when we click this button, we want to not only patch this information to the data source, we also want the data to show up right away in our report. And for that to happen in Power BI, it actually requires a visual refresh of the report, not a full website refresh, but only a visual refresh of the visualizations themselves, as long as we are working with direct query or direct link. And we're lucky enough that the Power BI integration element here that we use to reference data points in Power BI can also be used to send a request to Power BI saying, please perform a visual refresh. So because the formula language Power FX in Power Apps is sequential, I can, after showing my loading spinner and after running my CTE and after running my Power Automate flow, I can say, when all of this is done, I want you to actually refresh the visuals in my Power BI report. And it's going to do that after the write back is completed to ensure that the new data is coming in. And that's how this write back extension works. So let me just refresh this because I think the link broke. Just to recap for you how it actually worked in practice. Just want to show you that we can override a value now that you understand what's happening underneath the hood. So I can again take, maybe Kara decided that the true value of her email is in fact Kara6 at adventureworks.com. If I click this, you'll know that behind the hood, first I'm going to initialize a couple of variables with this CTE, right? I'm going to say that the destination table will be the customer table because I selected email. The column will be the email address column. The old value will be what's stated here, Kara5, and the new value is Kara6. When I click this button, it will run my Power Automate flow with those 4 variables as the dynamic parameters in my update statement, and it will replace any value in the customer table that says Kara5 at adventureworks.com with the value Kara6 at adventureworks.com. And once that's done, it's going to call a visual refresh, which is exactly similar to, well, now my screen is super small here, but there is a button up here to perform a visual refresh. The idea is just that we want the user to be able, well, we want the update to happen automatically instead of clicking up there, right? But clicking this, we'll see a little loading spinner. We'll see the visual refresh was triggered, and now Kara5 will update to Kara6 at adventureworks.com. And that's reflected directly in the database. So that's how you do write-back exercises with live feedback in Power BI and Fabric to a Fabric-based data warehouse. But it could just as well have been a SQL Server in Azure or a Dataverse table. And the difference again between this solution and this solution is that this solution is simpler because this value is not a part of the Power BI data model. This value only lives inside of a Dataverse table. Again, could have been a SQL Server table as well, but it's only ever referenced in the Power App itself. The Power BI report knows nothing about this destination, while this app is writing to the source of the Power BI report itself, which means that we can take this information and use it inside of the report we're actually in. And that's why it's a little more complex and complicated to work with. 2 down, 1 to go. So far, so good. Any questions so far in the chat? No, doesn't look like it. We'll power on then, seeing as we only have 10-15 minutes left. Excuse me if it gets a little rushed sometimes. It's hard to gauge if I'm going too fast when you get excited about what you're talking about. So the last extension that I wanted to show you is how to build really an API connection with Power Apps. And again, let me open up this app in edit mode, as you've seen me do a few times, just to establish a connection, despite the fact that for this app in particular, there's actually no connection between the Power BI report and the Power App. Regardless, Let's open it up so you can see how it's built, and I can show you that it's well, it's oddly easy to work with, depending on the API that you want to work with. The bane of live demos, right, is that you can't have everything preloaded. So there's a little bit of loading delay every once in a while. I'll just to keep talking while this is loading. Actually, let me try and reopen that. It shouldn't be that slow. I said before that Power Apps, just like Power BI, is able to connect to many different data sources: SQL Server, Dataverse, SharePoint lists. There's even a Twitter connector and everything, right? But there is not a connection to every single data source and API out there. And what you can do is that you can then instead define your own custom API connectors, if you so desire, inside of the Power Platform. So if I go to make.powerapps.com, I can go to custom connectors, and I can either import a Swagger API definition or Postman collection or Open API file, or create from blank. I can essentially create my own API definition like you would do it in many other integration services if you're used to data engineering. And you can define methods that you want to be able to call inside of your custom connector, and you can then subsequently use these connectors inside of your Power Apps, just like you would any other data connector that comes pre-installed. And so that's what I've done here. I won't have time to go in details with the exact way to do this, but essentially you need to provide the methods that you want to be able to use. You need to find the correct URLs, and you'll also need to define an API key to authenticate against the API in question, and you'll be able to create a custom connector towards that API. And here I'm just using my personal OpenAI ChatGPT API keys to create. Oh, this is really weird that it's not loading. But to create this extension that that you see here. Let me try and open it from in here instead. Something tells me that the Power Apps website is, maybe it's just my internet speed altogether. Let's hope this loads. Maybe I'm just impatient because all of you guys are watching. Let's try again from in here.
What is a brief definition of API?
What is a brief definition of an API?
You can't explain all of it, but just for a new person to understand.
Yeah, good question. I think maybe a more proper data engineer out there would be able to explain it better than I. I actually don't know what the abbreviation stands for. It's maybe application program interface, something like that. Anybody knows?
It stands for application program interface.
Right.
And what I mean is that it gives you an interface between software, so you can get you can pull or push information from one application to another one. So if you develop your application and you want to allow someone to use it externally, so you create an API, a way that other applications can contact yours.
Thank you for helping me with that that answer. That was much better than I would have been able to do. But it's essentially something that many applications do. Instead of providing direct access to the underlying database through an API, they can control what information they allow you to request and download from them, and limit how much you can get, etc. And that's what you would configure with this custom connector. However, even with custom connectors, now I finally got it to load right. In Power Apps, you're not only able to actually add the custom connectors that you create, you can also see if people have made their custom connectors publicly available. you will be able to use those as well. So right after I had developed my own custom connector here for ChatGPT, I realized that I could have just used this other one that was created by a community member, a fellow community member, Robin Rosengrün, who's a great Power Apps developer. He had published his own that we can just use. And now I could just use this like any other data source. So sometimes you might want to just see that somebody else built this before me. And for popular APIs, the common answer would probably be yes. And now, because my browser is acting up, I only have read-only access here. But oh, was there a question?
No, I'm saying this is exactly with the example to show what is an MPI. We do not control ChatGPT. We are using Microsoft API, their inside software option to connect to ChatGPT. So API is the external application, ChatGPT feature that allow us to connect it, get information, send information, and so on.
Exactly. And just to show you super briefly, what am I doing now in this Power App? It's actually very simple in structure. You can see here there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different graphical elements in this entire report. Page 2 is just a duplicate screen. I have a couple of labels going on. I have a text input where the user can ask their question. I have a submit button, and then I have a gallery to display the responses coming in from the API, as well as my own questions. And what I'm doing on this button is that I'm, again, if you ignore this show spinner thing, we have to read this from inside out. So what I'm doing first is that I'm saying, I'm creating a local collection here of messages. And I'm collecting first whatever the user themselves is inputting in this text input. And the reason I'm putting it into a collection is because we want to store both the question and the response in the same data table. So right here, I'm essentially creating a table of questions. And then I'm saying, okay, I want to call that API that I just added before. I want to call it using this OpenAI model. And I want to call it using this role and this question. And that those parameters depend on the API, but that's because when you ask ChatGPT, you need to say, well, I'm the user and I want to use this model and I want to use this this message as my question. And then the result of this formula right here will be a full response that I'm storing inside of a variable. That variable, I'm then also going to collect into the same table as before. So let's do a quick test. Again, what is a user group? Question mark. Submit that. And you'll see that I get not only my question, but also the response shown in the gallery. The gallery is referencing this table, and you can see that the table has 2 different rows. The first one is my question, what's a user group? It was asked by the user. And then I have the response that came in from the API, and you can see that that's given by the assistant. And I can use that data table's information to then format my Power App accordingly, right? I can have a profile image here where I say, well, if the role of this data row is user, then use the user profile image, and else use the ChatGPT logo. Also, maybe you can use it to manipulate the x-axis position and say, well, if again the role is user, display the icon here, and if not, display the icon here. So you can use that information that the API returns to you any way you like in the application itself. And that's the short way, I think, of explaining how you can leverage an API inside of Power BI like that. And as I said, the API could just as well have been a currency exchange, exchange rate service, or a weather forecast service, or a sports results tracker, or anything you can imagine that you wanted to embed inside of a Power BI report. So I think with that, that was the official demonstration part of the sort of presentation. And I wanted to again just ask if there are other questions that we should address while we are looking at all of those things.
Yeah, I think that you answered.
Yeah, can you go ahead? Yeah, how are you handling the errors?
One more time, sorry.
Yeah, how are you handling the errors?
When you if you have an error in the formula while you're developing, or on the user end, if the
On
user
the when it is running executing.
So the way you can do that in Power Apps is that you can wrap. Let's put this one instead. See if that works. Oh, now we got that one. So in
the camera, you are more since we finish the presentation. Show your face if you want, and you can continue asking your question. So you are able to share your camera if you want.
Sorry, I just need that one more time, Ronan. I missed the first thing that you said.
I just said to everyone that I just changed the setting of the meeting so they can share their camera. Basically, everyone now can share the camera, and if you have more questions, you are welcome to present them.
Yeah, just to briefly then touch on the error handling inside of Power Apps. So the way that it works is that for some of the objects inside of Power Apps, error handling comes built in. So for example, if I had inserted a control in my Power App where I used a form control, let's see, where do I have that? I do it in here. If I insert a form control and use that to create new items, I will have the option to define something to happen on success or on failure. And I could do this to, for example, notify. I could use the notify function to let my user know that your submission has failed, notification type error. And this will display an error banner at the top whenever this form fails to submit a record. If I'm configuring a button from the scratch, as I did today, the way that you can do it is that you can wrap your patch statements inside of a formula called errors, like this, which will check if whatever you put inside of errors runs successfully. And again, you can store the result of that inside of a variable and do something conditionally depending on the status of that variable sequentially after that has been run inside of your Power App. So you are able to provide the end user with some feedback depending on whether the query sent to the API or to the database was successful or not. And frankly, that would be best practice, right? You as a developer will quickly realize if you have errors in your formulas, as the Power App will simply not work, of course. But I guess your question was also more related to how will you know if the actual query succeeded or not.
Thank you.
Good question. Other questions, feel free to unmute or write in the chat. If not, let me just very, very briefly jump back here to my slides, just to say thank you. If you're curious about this overlap between Power BI Fabric and the Power Platform and how to empower Power BI and Fabric users to do more with their reports and more with their data, I have published quite a few articles on the subject on LinkedIn. So feel free to go ahead and find me there if you're curious and have questions about the session for today. Thank you so much.
John, if you summarize and present something, I'm sorry, I already I thought you finished. I took the control
that's fine.
and share slide, the closing slide.
I will just take a small screenshot of my contact details and post it in the chat for anybody who wants to get in touch.
That's great. We are recording this meeting, and hopefully we will not forget to publish it. It will take a day or two, or whatever, but usually we publish it soon after the meeting. Thanks a lot, John. It was a great session. Thanks a lot for joining us, everyone. And next week, we will have the weekly meeting, so just follow us. I highly recommend to follow the community website where you can find the upcoming events, our community events. And if you have any question, you can find me and Jen Joseph on social media, mostly Facebook and LinkedIn. So have a great time, everyone. Thanks again, John, for a great session.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure. See you around, guys.
Bye-bye, all. See you next week.
Thank you. Bye.